Jacob Ramsey is officially a Newcastle United player and Aston Villa aren't particularly happy about it. We're discussing a very interesting reaction to his departure and the striker situation as Alexander Isak continues to be in exile, plus an interesting link with an Italian midfielder and whether there's any legs to that. It's NUFC Transfer Daily, let's get into it. Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. It's Monday. NUFC Transfer Daily is back. Reaction from Saturday is on the channel right now. I'll link it in the description. I'll also link my reaction piece on Forbes that came out yesterday discussing how Newcastle battled on without Alexander Isak and the need for a striker which is burning. They created so many good opportunities. You would have thought that, Isak in any form, as I said in the video, would have helped Newcastle win that game, even if he just decided that he was playing at the very last minute without match fitness. The opportunities were there that he would have put away, I think, that Anthony Gordon just couldn't. And I explained kind of why between both the video and the article that I wrote. It was a good performance. I thought Newcastle has lots to build from. I can't believe that he looks at that and doesn't understand that he cost the team, and I think he will probably feel a little bit guilty, but is it enough to make him change his stance? No, probably not, because he has got tunnel vision for that move to Liverpool, which, as I keep saying, is not likely from his actions. And if Newcastle had found a replacement earlier, then they probably would have had this conversation. But now it's just a messy situation for everybody, whether he stays or goes. Somebody loses out, and that's kind of a big issue. I think we'll discuss that more. Big thing that happened was that wasn't discussed in the instant reactions, the chanting from the fans at Isak, which it's good of them to wait till after the game, and then the chants at Isak came out. And I'm not going to tell anybody what they can and can't do, and I understand the anger and I understand the disappointment towards Isak, and it was a very pointed message from the away end. The debate has become whether he has a future at the club, and actually I don't think anything really has changed. Eddie Howe's opened the door. He said that I think he wants him to come back, but says it's on him to make that choice, and he wants clarity. Absolutely fair. I think the players would take him back. I know some of them, the interviews from Gordon and Dan Burns suggested that they're not particularly happy with him, and I think that that's absolutely fair, but I'm sure they would take him back. He's a world-class striker, and from their perspective, I'm sure some of them probably understand how he feels, even if they don't agree. We talked about this on the True Faith podcast yesterday. The club has some sympathy for him. That was written in Craig Hope's piece. I've spoken to a couple of people as well with a little bit of insight on this. I think he's been led astray by an agent who's got his own agenda. But obviously, Alex Isak is the person making these decisions. Ultimately, he's the person who's setting the tone, and he can change things, as Eddie Howe says. Still think nothing's changed. Still think he's got a future at the club if he stays. And it's in his interest to play for Newcastle next season if he's still at the club. I don't for a second believe this idea and this threat that he's not going to play beyond September and he's going to do a Pierre van Hooijdonk at Nottingham Forest and completely go AWOL. I just wouldn't benefit anybody, least of all him in a World Cup year, as we've mentioned before. And for the fans' perspective, yes, I understand the anger, but I'm sure, and let me know in the comment section if you disagree with this, but a couple of goals in a big game to win a game, it would absolutely make a huge difference. So ultimately, I think nothing's really changed except the need for a striker, which is more in detail discussed on Saturday's video, but we are going to discuss whether there is going to be a striker coming in later in the video. First of all, we're going to talk a bit more about Jacob Ramsey, the really interesting reaction I've read from a couple of the Villa players and some fans to his exit, which again is very positive, because when we talked about Malik Chow and his exit from Milan, it was really interesting to note that a lot of the fans weren't happy and Max Allegri wasn't happy. He wanted him to stay, which is a really good sign. When a manager and a club don't want to sell the player, it shows how much they're doing right to as players and people within within that club. So John McGinn's message to Jacob Ramsey was really interesting. He sort of blamed PSR and said that that's how football is, and there was a really interesting quote from Unai Emery on BBC that I saw yesterday, really sticking the knife into PSR. And I know in the comment section have wanted me to touch on this. There is a real problem, and it was mentioned and quite pointed at Villa Park on Saturday when both sets of fans started joining in with the chants at the Premier League, suggesting that it's a joint issue, and I think it is. There's lots of clubs who are trying to get into the top six and top four and really break that permanently, and it's what Newcastle and Villa both really want to do to progress, and they've both hit a wall of some sort in different ways over the last few months, and this summer it's really come home to roost in different ways for both clubs, and that is a problem. And John McGinn really blaming PSR as the reason. I think that it was kind of an open secret, but I'm not sure Jacob Ramsey would be leaving Villa if it weren't for PSR. In the same way, I'm not sure Elliot Anderson wouldn't have left for Nottingham Forest if it weren't for PSR. But as with Anderson, maybe it has a positive impact on his career. Jacob Ramsey can come to Newcastle and get a lot of game times in various different ways. I think he could be, and I'm going to write a piece for Forbes this afternoon on this, I think he could be the most important signing of the summer in his own way, and I'm going to explain that more on the piece. I think mainly though it's because of his versatility, and I tweeted yesterday that he's the sort of signing that maybe doesn't get the excitement, doesn't get people excited immediately, but you'll see what his impact is later in the season. When the fixtures pile up and injuries take hold, the strength of the squad and the versatility that he brings will be invaluable, so I think he'll be a really important signing. Tyrone Mings as well, refusing, not having anybody say anything bad about him as well, and lots of Villa fans really upset, not just that they've lost one of their own as a young lad, but also a really important player for the team, for the versatility, for the energy levels, and what he brings is more of what Eddie Howe wants. That was what Joe Willock at his best brings, is the pace, the power, the transition, ball progression. Jacob Ramsey brings all that, plus more versatility, and probably a better all-round midfield package in terms of his defensive numbers and his passing stats too. We've looked at his FB ref stats from a couple of years ago in a previous video, and they were really impressive. So I'm really excited about this signing, and I'm glad that it's finally over the line. But that brings us on to the next thing, and Davide Frattesi, Gazzetta dello Sport over the weekend, saying Newcastle had a bid rejected by Inter for the 25-year-old Italian midfielder. Very similar to Ramsey in terms of being more offensive-minded midfielder, somebody who can get into the box a lot more and has good XG. Again, I'm not going to go into his stats because I'm not quite sure if this rumour has got any legs and whether it'll happen now that Ramsey's through the door or whether it was an alternative to Ramsey. I think we're going to have to see if this progresses before we touch on his stats, but he certainly would have fit the bill for the midfielder, and certainly would fit the bill for a midfielder if maybe Joe Willock was to be sold, and whether that's still possible. But it was a very much a present tense suggestion over the weekend after the Jacob Ramsey thing had happened. It wasn't just that Newcastle maybe were interested and have moved on. Perhaps this has got something from the Italian side. I don't have any insight on this, and I would take it with a pinch of salt. That's always been my rule, generally, to take things with a pinch of salt when they emanate from the country of these players, where they come from. But that's exactly what happened with Sandro Tonali, and that obviously happened. So we'll see whether this one does play out. But in terms of a midfielder, if you replaced Willock with Frattesi, I think Joe Willock probably needs upgrading at this stage. He's had a difficult 18 months really with both injuries and subsequently form. I think there's been a real impact on his overall career by the last couple of years of difficult injuries. So I would look at bringing in Davide Frattesi if it's possible, but I don't see how it is now because of the Jacob Ramsey thing. Let me know again in the comment section what you think, but to me this feels like something that maybe they discussed, if anything, over the last week, and maybe had a chat with Inter. Who knows, maybe Newcastle's name's just being used as a way to generate interest. Who, again, I don't have any insight in it, but he's a very exciting player and would be an excellent upgrade at the right price if that's still possible. But that was before Jacob Ramsey came in, and I can't see him coming in. Ramsey's through the door, and I think that's the big thing that'll probably mean that this Frattesi stuff doesn't get off the ground. Again, I have no insight on that at this stage, though Alexander Isak's future will be at Newcastle. I think from Newcastle's perspective, nothing's changed. He is contracted for 3 years. Liverpool aren't coming to the table with the right offer, and crucially, most importantly, there aren't two replacements through the door, and that's the big thing that I think will define whether Isak is still at Newcastle at the end of August, early September. Johan Wissa could progress now because Dango Ouattara has gone to Brentford. Again, though, whether that's a Brian Mbeumo placement, as they keep suggesting. Whether that does mean that Newcastle can progress with Wissa, we'll see. Gonçalo Ramos again linked because of fresh encouragement, according to Craig Hope. The value on his head is around 60 million at least, which would give PSG a profit when he's not been a first team regular in that team for 2 years. He's a great goal scorer. He scored in the cup, he scored in the Super Cup. He comes alive in the box. We discussed him a couple of weeks ago, but he just doesn't fit the bill. And we saw at the weekend what the lack of a physical presence, what the lack of somebody running behind is on Newcastle's style of play. And I think, yes, he's a better goal scorer. Yes, he's probably finished a couple of those chances that Gordon didn't, but the build-up play would be very similar, and that frustrated me. I think Newcastle need someone more physical, and replacing Isak with Gonçalo Ramos and bringing Wissa in, there isn't that physicality and someone who's leading the line. I think that would be a big problem for me. I don't see this one as a good thing, even though I do rate him, and I know there's Samu Agahawa who's possible as well. But Newcastle will be doing something that they don't really want to do, and it would cost them a lot of money. That's a big worry for me. Newcastle's recruitment has been lauded for 3 years because they've gone for players that they really trust and know and like a lot. They looked at Ramos, decided against him, and haven't gone in for him since. And that's kind of what would worry me about this, is that the feeling that they're rushing the decision to get Isak out the door. They need to take their time. It needs to be on their terms if they sell Isak, and I would keep him, reintegrate him as best they can for the next year, and then plan for a proper sale then. If Samu has had another great year at Porto, perhaps he's the right man in that scenario, because physically and profile wise he absolutely is. But Ramos, as good of a goal scorer as he is, I don't think he's the right man. The price would be very heavy. The narrative has become that Newcastle could look at Premier League options as cheaper alternatives, but with Jorgen Strand Larsen and Jean-Philippe Mateta, as mentioned, they would cost probably similar money. If you're going to try and go and get them out of Wolves and Crystal Palace, the money that they would cost at that point would be too much to be worth it, and especially in January as well. Nothing that Newcastle do, even if Liverpool come with 150 million at this point, would benefit them, and that's why they have to tell Isak to get his head straight and play until next summer. I think someone like Samu next summer, after another season in Portugal, maybe he's the person, because he'll be a year older, and that is really important. He'll be in that position. That would be the way I would go at this stage, rather than rushing into someone like Gonçalo Ramos or Mateta or Strand Larsen or something else like that. There's just no way Newcastle can benefit. Some fans want him out because they can't bear to look at him anymore, but Harry Kane thought he was going to Manchester City. He'd given up on his Spurs career, and he went back and played there for 2 more years and then got a hero's exit to Bayern Munich. I don't think that's going to happen for Alexander Isak. He can get his head down, score another 25 goals and go with Newcastle's blessing next summer. I think there's a lot of love for him still within the club, and that's ultimately what matters. So that's what I think on the striker situation. I'm still very unmoved from my position that Alexander Isak should stay. Frattesi I don't see happening. Very pleased to have Jacob Ramsey through the door. I'll be back tomorrow with another episode of NUFC Transfer Daily. Thanks for joining me. See you then. Cheers.